Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is Pro-Revenge Story. Someone suggested I post this story over here. Enjoy. When our first child was born, my husband Jake forced me to quit my job. When our second child was 2, I discovered his affair with a coworker. By then, he had become extremely verbally, emotionally, and sometimes physically abusive. When he shoved our firstborn, Mia, against a wall during one of his rages, I put him out immediately. That was in 2020. "You can't just kick me out of my own house!" Jake had shouted, his face red with anger. "Watch me," I replied, standing my ground while shielding the kids behind me. "You crossed a line today." I couldn't afford daycare to work and had no family support nearby. Jake refused to give me any money to take care of the kids. "The courts haven't ordered me to give you a dime," he sneered during one of our confrontations in the driveway. "Figure it out yourself, Sarah." He lied to the bank and had my accounts frozen and even assaulted me when I filed for default in the divorce, grabbing my arm so hard it left bruises when I tried to walk away from an argument. The judge finally ordered him to pay child and spousal support 6 months after I kicked him out. It was $2,562 a month. He refused to pay it until the garnishment kicked in, and by then he was $6,000 behind in support. I used that to get permission to move away. "You can't take my kids," he had protested during the hearing. "Mr. Davis," the judge had replied sternly, "perhaps if you had shown more financial responsibility toward your children, we wouldn't be here discussing this matter." I remarried a year after the divorce to Daniel, who had been my rock through everything. I checked the court docs, and there was a little box that said spousal support stopped upon remarriage if that box was checked. It wasn't checked, so I figured I was good. Instead of filing for Jake's retirement, I just took that year of spousal support, about $12,000, and left it alone. Spousal support was only ordered for 2 years anyway. In 2023, Jake filed for sole custody of the kids out of nowhere. "I can provide a more stable environment," he claimed during our first mediation session, looking smug in his expensive suit. "By stable, do you mean the same environment where you pushed your daughter into a wall?" I countered. That was when he found out I had remarried and he had paid spousal support to me during the first year of my marriage. "You've been stealing from me," he shouted across the table. I told him I took that money instead of filing for my share of his retirement. I said if he let me keep that $12,000, I wouldn't file to split his 401k. "I'm not negotiating with a thief," he snarled. "You're paying back every cent." Jake demanded that I repay the spousal support. The judge ordered me to repay it but increased child support and deducted the repayment from that. It ended up that I got an extra $20 a month and he repaid himself. He dropped his bid for custody in exchange for 2 extra weeks in summer. "This isn't over," he warned as we left the courthouse. "It never is with you," I replied tiredly. I pursued the retirement account split. Jake refused to cooperate and dragged it out for 4 years. It was so bad they sanctioned him and he had to pay me $600 a month for a year in addition to child support. They also charged him with contempt. "Your client's obstruction is testing the court's patience," the judge had told his lawyer. "This pattern of behavior cannot continue." In January 2025, Jake proposed to his girlfriend, Vanessa. In May of 2025, I finally got the disbursement from his 401k. I won't say how much it was, but it was about 4 times the amount of spousal support overpayment. I had no idea it would be that much. I had thought it would be around $12,000, which is why I thought keeping that year of spousal and not filing for his retirement account was a fair trade. Had he not tried to take the kids from me, I never would have filed to split the account. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Vanessa emailed me recently and told me it is my fault Jake won't marry her because I cleaned out his retirement account. "You had no right to steal Jake's money," her email read. "He worked hard for that retirement and now our wedding is on hold because of your greed." I called her to set the record straight. I gave him the option to let me keep that year of spousal support or take it back and I could file for his retirement. He chose to have me file for his retirement. "He shouldn't have lost anything. That was his money," she shouted. I told him exactly what would happen, I explained calmly. "If he really wants to marry you and protect his assets, you could get a prenup so he wouldn't have to worry about it." "I shouldn't have to sign a prenup because you robbed him," she snapped before hanging up. I never asked to be financially dependent on Jake. He clearly indicated he wanted a court order to take care of his kids, so I got him one. I tried to be fair and take the lesser amount by taking the spousal support and not filing for his retirement. He wouldn't let me. "Daniel, do you think I was wrong?" I asked my husband later that night. He put his arm around me and shook his head. "You gave Jake every opportunity to do the right thing. He made his choices." In summary, my ex refused to pay me until support orders dropped, refused to pay until they revoked his license, Tried to get me in trouble for accepting spousal support over payment, and in the end it cost him a lot of money out of his 401k. The next one is an entitled people story. I bought my house about 3 years ago in what seemed like a quiet suburban neighborhood. The place had an HOA, but during the buying process, they seemed reasonable enough. The fees were low, the rules looked standard, and I figured I could deal with the occasional notice about keeping my grass trimmed. I work as a real estate attorney, so I actually read through the entire covenant document before signing, unlike most people. That decision would turn out to be incredibly important later. Everything was fine for the first 2 years. I kept my property neat, paid my fees on time, and mostly ignored the HOA's existence. Then the board elections happened and a new president took over. This guy was a retired middle manager type who clearly missed having people to boss around. Within a month of taking office, violation notices started flying around the neighborhood like confetti. Someone's mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Another person's garden gnome violated the decorative items clause. It was getting ridiculous. I managed to avoid his attention until late spring when I decided to build a small garden shed in my backyard. I checked the HOA rules carefully. Sheds were allowed as long as they were under a certain square footage, matched the house's color scheme, and weren't visible from the street. My backyard was completely fenced and faced a wooded area, so visibility wasn't an issue. I made sure my shed plans complied with every single requirement in the covenant. I submitted my architectural request form as required, including detailed plans, measurements, and photos showing where it would go. The approval process was supposed to take 30 days maximum according to the bylaws. 30 days passed, then 40, then 50. I sent polite follow-up emails that went unanswered. I finally called the HOA president directly. He told me he was denying my request because he didn't think sheds were appropriate for the neighborhood aesthetic. I pointed out that sheds were explicitly allowed in the covenant, and mine met all requirements. He got irritated and said the board had discretion to deny anything they wanted. I stayed calm and reminded him that discretion still had to follow the written rules. He basically told me to pound sand and hung up. I decided to wait and see what happened. About a week later, I came home from work early one afternoon and found 3 HOA board members in my backyard. Not at my front door asking permission, not calling first. Actually inside my fenced yard, taking photos of my property with their phones and clipboards. The gate was open, and they were just wandering around like they owned the place. I walked into the backyard and asked what they were doing. The president barely looked up from his clipboard before telling me they were conducting a property inspection. I asked if they had permission to be there. He actually laughed and said the HOA covenant gave them the right to inspect properties to ensure compliance. I asked him to show me where exactly it said that. He got red in the face and told me to check section 12 or something, waving his hand dismissively. Here's where my legal training kicked in. I knew that covenant inside and out, and there was absolutely no provision allowing the HOA to enter private property without permission or notice. What the covenant actually said was that violations visible from common areas or streets could be documented and cited. It said nothing about entering yards. I told them they were trespassing and needed to leave immediately. The president puffed up and said I was being difficult and uncooperative. He said that if I had nothing to hide, I shouldn't have a problem with them looking around. The other 2 board members just stood there looking uncomfortable. I repeated that they were trespassing and gave them one more chance to leave. Instead of leaving, the president decided to double down. He said that since I was being so hostile and uncooperative, he was issuing me a formal violation notice for my attitude and failure to cooperate with board inspections. He literally started writing it up right there in my yard. Then he added that I was also being fined for having an unapproved shed project, even though I hadn't even started building yet. He claimed the materials I had stacked along my fence were evidence of unauthorized construction. Those materials were actually leftover lumber from a different project, but he didn't care. He handed me a violation notice demanding that I pay a $500 fine within 10 days and attend a mandatory HOA hearing where I would need to explain my behavior and request permission to continue living in the neighborhood peacefully. Yes, he actually wrote that last part. The other board members looked mortified at this point, but said nothing. After they finally left, I went inside and did something I rarely do. I smiled. This guy had just made a spectacular mistake, and he'd put it all in writing. I spent that evening preparing for the hearing. I pulled up the complete HOA covenant, the bylaws, and the state property laws. I also reviewed case law about HOA overreach and trespassing. Then, I compiled a detailed timeline of everything that had happened, including the ignored architectural approval, the trespassing incident, and the retaliatory violation notice. I organized everything into a neat folder. When the hearing date arrived, I showed up to the community center where they held board meetings. There were maybe 20 other residents there, which was unusual. Apparently, word had gotten around that someone was actually challenging the new president, and people wanted to see what would happen. The board sat at a table in front with the president in the middle looking smug. He opened the hearing by reading the violation notice against me and asking if I had anything to say in my defense. I stood up and said I absolutely did have something to say. I thanked him for making this hearing mandatory because it gave me the perfect opportunity to address several serious issues. I started by asking him to cite the specific covenant provision that allowed the HOA board to enter private property without permission or notice. He fumbled through his papers for a minute before saying it was common practice. I asked again for the specific written provision. He couldn't provide one because it didn't exist. Then I pulled out my copy of the covenant and read aloud the actual provision, which clearly stated that the HOA's inspection rights were limited to violations visible from common areas and that entry onto private property required either explicit permission or proper legal notice for specific violations. I explained that what the board had done was textbook trespassing under state law. The president started to interrupt, but I wasn't done. I noted that I had submitted a proper architectural request that met all requirements, and that the covenant specified a maximum 30-day review period. It had now been over 60 days with no formal response, which according to the bylaws meant automatic approval of my request. I had that in writing. Then I addressed the retaliatory fine. I explained that the fine was issued specifically because I objected to the trespassing, which made it retaliatory rather than based on any actual violation. I also pointed out that the covenant required specific documentation of violations before fines could be issued, and taking photos while trespassing didn't count as proper documentation. At this point, several other residents were nodding along, and the two other board members looked like they wanted to disappear, but I still wasn't finished. I pulled out the violation notice and read aloud the part where it demanded I request permission to continue living in the neighborhood peacefully. I said I was happy to comply with that request right now. I formally requested permission to continue living in my home peacefully without harassment, trespassing, or retaliatory actions from the HOA board. Then I added that since we were all here discussing permissions, I wanted to formally request that the board provide written documentation showing their permission to enter my property without my consent. I also requested written documentation of any covenant provision that allowed them to deny a compliant architectural request beyond the 30-day review period. I gave them 10 days to provide these documents, exactly the same time frame they'd given me to pay the bogus fine. The room was completely silent. The president's face had gone from smug to pale. One of the other board members actually spoke up and said maybe they should table this discussion and review the covenant more carefully. The president tried to argue, but the third board member agreed that they needed to reconsider. I wasn't quite done, though. I mentioned that I'd prepared a comprehensive legal memo documenting all the covenant violations, trespassing incidents, and procedural failures I'd observed. I'd be happy to share it with any residents who were interested in understanding their actual rights versus what they've been told. I also noted that if the HOA wanted to pursue the violation notice against me, I'd be happy to see them in court where we could discuss everything in front of a judge. Several residents immediately asked for copies of my memo. The president tried to shut down the meeting, but people were already crowding around me asking questions about other questionable fines and violations they'd received. It turned out I wasn't the only one who'd been dealing with this guy's power trip. Within a week, I received a formal letter from the HOA. The violation notice was withdrawn. My architectural request was approved. The board issued a formal apology for entering my property without permission. The letter was signed by all 3 board members, but the story gets better. 2 months later, there was a special election to recall the president. Apparently enough, residents had gotten fed up with the harassment and overreach. The vote wasn't even close. He was out, and 2 new board members who actually understood the covenant were elected. I built my shed exactly as I'd planned. It's perfect for storing my lawn equipment and gardening tools. Every time I look at it, I remember the expression on that president's face when he realized he'd picked a fight with someone who actually knew the rules better than he did. The new board is much more reasonable. They follow the actual covenant instead of making up rules as they go along. And I've never had another surprise visit to my backyard. Funny how that works when people actually follow the law. The best part is that I never had to sue anyone or make threats. I just did exactly what the president demanded. I showed up to the hearing, made my case, and formally requested permission to live peacefully. He wrote the rules of engagement himself, and I simply played by them. Sometimes malicious compliance is just giving people exactly what they asked for and letting them realize how badly they messed up. The next one is a petty revenge story. After reading a lot of these stories recently, I, 19F at the time, remembered a petty revenge story of mine. This happened over a year ago, so sorry if the dialogue isn't perfect. During the pandemic, my family often got takeout from many of our local restaurants to support small businesses that might be struggling. Usually, we would just order online or call, but this time my dad had a coupon for Uber Eats, so we ordered through the app and scheduled for pickup. When I got to the restaurant, they appeared to be a lot busier than normal, with several people coming and going to get their orders. When I got to the front of the line to ask about my order, they couldn't find it. I was asked a few questions about the order number and what name it could be under. Wasn't sure if my dad had used his name, my mom's name, etc. In order to not hold up the line, I told the server I would step outside for a few minutes to call my dad for answers. I came back inside and the server I had talked to waved me over. It was definitely me he was motioning at since we made eye contact. The hostess was currently busy talking to someone else and there was a line of people waiting to order from her. I started telling the server the information he needed to find my order when suddenly a male Karen cleared his throat next to me. I hadn't noticed that he had followed me over from the back of the line. I thought maybe the server was motioning to this guy instead of me, and I said, "Oh, sorry, you go first," to which he quickly snapped back, "I will, since I was here before you." The server let out one of those shocked, breathy laughs and said, "No. Actually, I was helping this young lady first." Male Karen, MK, raised his voice a little. "Excuse me, did you not see her walk into the store after I was waiting in line for 3 minutes already? I just want my order taken." The server ignored MK, and I continued telling him which order to look for. We then found out that my order somehow didn't make it into the system because of some glitch in the Uber Eats app. MK impatiently mumbled, "Great, you're done now, me." The server said, "I'm sorry, sir, we'll need a couple more minutes. West_Coast_Girl12 will have to replace the order." I panicked because I couldn't remember exactly what my other family members had ordered. I asked if it was alright to step back outside and call my dad again to ask what was ordered. The server just smirked and said, "No, it's alright, stay right here and take your time." He seemed to be encouraging me to mess with MK, so I did. I took another 5 minutes to call my dad, place the order, and go over every single item twice to make sure it was all accounted for, and went to go sit in the waiting area. MK, who at this point had a vein on his forehead looking like it was about to burst, said, "Finally." The server asked how he could help MK, to which he gritted his teeth and said, "I would like to place my order." The server politely replied, "I'm sorry, I only help with online orders. If you'd like to place an order to go, please see the hostess." Then motioned over to the line that had grown since he had stepped out of it nearly 10 minutes ago. MK aggressively sighed, "Fine, I'll take my business elsewhere," and stormed out. The server looked over at me and we both giggled after MK left. Apparently, he regularly called to complain about orders and the staff were tired of dealing with him all the time. The next one is a malicious compliance story. In light of all the generic AI slop trash this sub has been flooded with, I figured I'd give my MC story that I've been holding on to for a while. It's been many years since I worked for the company this relates to, but if you have any knowledge of the industry, then you know it's an acronym for My Ride. Being a private ambulance company, they acquired the contract to provide transport of patients to the hospital when they call 911. The city-county pays a flat rate in the contract to make sure that an ambulance responds and arrives on scene within 8 minutes and 59 seconds from the time of dispatch. On top of that, our company was allowed to bill the patient's insurance for the transportation and cost of treatment. Given our location, that is a pretty reasonable criteria. Per the contract, we were allowed to have 10% of our response times to be what was called late response, meaning we arrived on scene 9 minutes or later. This on-time versus late ratio was what we called compliance. 98% compliance were golden, 89% compliance. Emails started going out and phones started ringing. The thing is, we had to maintain daily compliance. We could have 0 compliance from midnight to 3 a.m., but as long as the compliance picked up and we met 90% or greater by midnight the end of the day, we were considered compliant. But here's the real kicker. Our management was the only entity responsible for reporting compliance to the county, and that means numbers were scrubbed and fudged upside down, left and right. They used special delays or exemptions that would drop the response times from the reports and consider them outliers. Generally used for if an ambulance is delayed by a train crossing, construction, severe weather conditions, etc. But management abused these delays in their reports to maintain compliance. Now, being responsible for the safety and care of critically sick or injured people, you'd think that they would adequately staff the ambulances to handle the population of our service area and throw a little extra staff on top just to be safe and make sure they could handle anything that happens, right? Haha, no. They're trying to make money. If they can maintain compliance with less people, they did it. Hell, even if they couldn't make compliance, they'd use the delay exemptions to make it look like they were compliant. But it's not like anyone was auditing them anyways, we were simply understaffed. We constantly ran at what's called level 0, in which the level refers to the number of ambulances available to respond to calls. If corporate had their way, if you could run a level 0 constantly and still make compliance, we would be operating at peak efficiency, and the shareholders were happy. We were pressured to unsafely blow through stop signs and red lights, drive faster than reasonably necessary. Hell, even our supervisor taught us the trick of using the cruise control to bypass the speed limiter on our trucks. We were tired, overworked, and spent more time driving in high-stress environments than the DOT would ever even let truck drivers get close to. We complained to the union, we tried whistleblowing to the county, but nothing changed. We'd had it. The contract renewal was coming up. We had to be perfect with response times and look good so we could secure the next 4 years of service. But we all agreed. Enough was enough. We started following the laws regarding Code 3 driving, lights and sirens. We stopped at every stop sign or red light. We drove no faster than we deemed safe for conditions. We sandbagged the ever-living duck out of our response times and drove compliance straight into the ground. Unless the response was absolutely critical, every bellyache and stubbed toe, which was 90% of our calls, we took our reasonable sweet-ass time getting there. The exemptions couldn't even mask the failure of our compliance. 2 weeks in and many meetings with supervision, they couldn't write us up for being safer, and they started to staff more ambulances to regain compliance in time for the end of the month. It lasted a while, but I sought out employment elsewhere and haven't looked back since. I missed the job, but not the company. The next one is an entitled people story. This story took place when I was working in a very famous chain chicken restaurant while in college. It was a very busy Friday night with a lobby full of people waiting to order, a drive-through line that wrapped around the building, and a full dining room. Enter the Karen. She ordered a large family-sized bucket of chicken with all the typical containers of sides such as mashed potatoes and biscuits, etc. She ordered the whole lot to go, took her bags, got in her car, and drove away. Normally, that'd be the end of the interaction, but sadly, this was only the beginning. About an hour later, the restaurant's phone rang, and I, being the shift supervisor, answered the phone. It's the large meal Karen on the other end of the phone. She immediately launched into a shrieking tirade about how her food was ice cold and soggy when she got home. I quickly apologized for her inconvenience and offered her a coupon for a discount on her next purchase. I foolishly thought that the problem has been solved, but there was so much more to come. Jump ahead to the very next Friday night. The exact same chain of events occurs with large meal Karen. She came in, ordered her feast, took her bags, got in her car, and drove away. An hour later, she called the restaurant for the second busy Friday in a row to keep an employee tied up on the phone with her cussing rant. Her food was cold and soggy, she demands compensation, she wants to talk to the owner, blah blah. For the second week in a row, I apologize for the inconvenience and offer her a discount on her next visit. Problem solved again, but this time I inform the store manager about the ongoing drama with this lady. Wait for it. The very next Friday, for the third week in a row, our large meal Karen returned. As soon as I saw her walk into the lobby, I got my store manager to come up front and wait on her. She was prattling on about the disappointing service and poor quality before it was even her turn at the register. She ordered her usual haul, got her discount from the previous week, took her bag, and drove away. You guessed it. The restaurant's phone rung over an hour later, and it's cold chicken Karen. She wants to talk to the manager, she wants gas money, she wants free food, she wants firstborn children, yada yada. She screeched at me that once again her food was ice cold when she got home. You idiots don't know how to pack food! This happens every time! As I am trying to apologize to her and calm her down, she screamed in my ear that I am too stupid and she wants the real boss. I passed the phone to the store manager, who lets her foam at the mouth and rant for what seemed like an eternity. Once Karen ran out of breath and my boss could get a word in, he asked her one simple question. "Ma'am, where do you live?" Karen replied with the name of her town like it was no big deal. My boss looked simultaneously shocked and ticked off. Then he loudly said, "Ma'am, that town is over 1 hour's drive from this building, and it's an absolutely ridiculous expectation to think that your food would be perfectly hot when you get home. You cannot possibly think that you're going to transport hot food for over an hour in below freezing winter temperatures and it's still going to be hot." This idiotic Karen was not having it. She demanded more free food, gas money, and coupons. I could hear her howler monkey screeches as my boss held the phone away from his ear. Then he went nuclear. He raised his voice right back at her and told her absolutely none of that will be happening, and furthermore, we will not tolerate any more of this disruption to our business every week. Consider yourself permanently banned from this location. If you come back, we will refuse to serve you, call the police, and have you removed from the property. Then he slammed the phone down right in her face as she continued to screech on the other end. Luckily for us, she must have found another place to get her Friday night feast. We never saw her again after that, thank all the chicken gods. The next one is an entitled parent story. I, 30F, made the decision to cut my mom, 66F, out of my life 2 months ago. This process has made me realize so much of my childhood was tainted by her and her mental illness. My mother has chronic depression and likely PTSD. She's been mentally ill my entire life. I remember my mom coming home from work and spending the rest of the day in bed. She would tell me frequently that I was the only thing stopping her from killing herself regularly when I was a young child. My earliest memories are from when my parents were together, so at the oldest I was 8. My father cheated on her, and she went from bad to worse. She never sought professional help outside of that from a psychiatrist occasionally. I remember a night when she mixed alcohol with her medication when I was 9 and passed out on my floor. I had to call paramedics and genuinely thought my mother was dead. She was treated and thought the whole thing, and my anxiety about thinking my mom died in front of me, was hilarious. She had a string of terrible relationships that she obviously stayed in, not caring of the impact this had on me. She only left the main partner when she found out he had been lying about working for months while she spent all of her money supporting him. And of course, I got to play the role of therapist to her while being a teenager being put through a very traumatic family situation, even outside of her antics. When I went away for college, I knew she would go off the deep end. I felt so much concern about leaving my mom alone, even at 18 when I should have been excited to start my life, and I was correct. She would call me incessantly, threatening to cut off my phone and my health insurance if I didn't answer her. We had a lot of conflict as a result, but I relied on her financially, so I always gave in. I had my daughter when I was 26 and planned my induction date ahead of when I was due, so she wouldn't be at the hospital. Thankfully, my girl came a little early, and my mill and fiance were there, only ones there. My mom had gastric bypass when I was 25, against mine and everyone's advice, and as such was in very bad health. The dosage of the many different medications she was on was incredibly high. She flew out the week of my due date, and it was genuinely one of the worst weeks of my life. She would regularly nod out in front of my in-laws. At one point she was eating ice cream in my bed, that she took after I just had a baby, and nodded so hard she spilled it all over my brand new bedding my mill had gotten me. She then put a hole in my wall falling in our hallway trying to tell me. I never received an apology for this and spent the first week of my daughter's life cleaning up after her. Since she was born, I've had many epiphanies about how she parented me, the things I saw and endured because of her. Given my father's actions, she always cast herself in the role of the better parent, and I bought that, for some time. But my dad has since gotten help, apologized to me, and continues to, and has done everything to be present in mine and my family's life. I look at my mother's actions, and I'm appalled as a parent. I am also a practicing therapist and see parents every day trying to heal themselves to be better for their children. I have begged, screamed, pleaded every way I know how for my mother to get help. She is clearly misusing her medication, and it is only getting worse. The last straw was my birthday in June. I hadn't been home in 2 years and came out to spend my 30th with her. 2 weeks prior, on Father's Day, she ran her car into a building. She had no remorse at all. And her partner, same guy that screwed her over when I was a teen, called me, scared out of his mind because she didn't care at all that she had done so. I wouldn't have known if he hadn't told me. I called her, admittedly flaming mad. She could have killed herself or someone else and did damage someone's business, and she didn't care. She became spiteful with me, laughing at me for being so upset about my Father's Day with my dad and fiancé being ruined because she was upset that I was upset on their behalf for having to deal with her negligence for herself and others. So coming out, things were already bad. When I saw her home's condition, I knew immediately she was not well. It was disgusting and filled with junk collected over years. She couldn't hold a conversation with me without nodding out and having to be woken up multiple times. She also joked about how I didn't find it funny that she ran her literal vehicle into someone's business. She also forgot my birthday to top it off. She said we could go eat, but then told me she didn't want to eat what I wanted because her partner wouldn't like it. She then could not find her car rental, because she totaled the other one, despite it being parked in front of her home. I couldn't drive the rental and didn't feel safe with her behind the wheel, so I left and spent the rest of the day with my childhood best friend. After that day, I was done. We haven't spoken in 2 months. I have no plans to ever speak to her again, and she is very, very angry. My fiance refuses to block her number, and she is consistently going between angry threats, go ahead and turn off Peacock Mom, and desperate pleas to talk to me or see my daughter. She can't believe she's being kept from her granddaughter when there is no way in hell I am exposing my daughter to a drug addict who refuses any help offered to her. I have severed all financial ties and have also gotten sober myself. I was a stoner, to put it lightly. I post about that often. She only sees how her actions impact herself and constantly victimizes herself, doing nothing to alleviate her own suffering or the suffering of others that she causes. She is completely alone, besides her partner who stays because he would be homeless otherwise, and frankly, that is a consequence of her own actions. I feel lighter without the pressure of seeing another text or request to call when she can't even hold her head up, but I am also devastated. I am so angry, and I just wish I could call my mom. I wish I had someone to lean on, talk about mom stuff with, get advice from, but I don't. And through this time of reflection, I realized I never did. She cast herself in the image of a perfect mother. I am not a perfect mother. I am constantly doubting if I'm even a halfway decent one, but I have dedicated my life to getting better. And I am so angry because I know I deserved at least that from her. I don't know. This is a lot of information to read, and if you did, know that I'm bearing my soul a bit here. This hurts so much. I hurt for my mom, who will undoubtedly die alone. I hurt for my daughter, who will never know her grandmother. I mourn for younger me, who endured so much without even knowing what she deserved from the adults in her life, but loved them so freaking much anyways. And I'm mourning for me now, for having to go through the prime years of my life without a mother, simply because she refuses to get well. I have tried multiple times to advise her, as this is now what I do, and having gone through a healing journey myself, she has refused my help. Maybe she'll attend a few sessions, and then she finds reasons to stop. Now she is addicted to drugs that would require a medical detox at 66 years of age. It is beyond helping at this point, and I will no longer make myself endure the pain of watching her finally kill herself, like she always wanted to do. It's the realization that I wasn't enough for her. The professional in me knows it's her illness. The mother in me is angry as hell. The daughter in me is incredibly hurt, and I just don't know what to do with all of it, besides give it time and wait for the inevitable phone call that she's gone. Thank you for reading if you did. I didn't really know where else to put this, but it felt good getting it all out. If anyone has any experience here, I would love to talk to someone who unfortunately understands this pain. We don't have to go through this alone. Anyway, thank you.